The Dragon Ball Z fanbase has existed because of its near timeless and classic status. But even then, there are some truths about the series that the fans have learned to live with. For example, the fact that our protagonist Goku isn't the greatest father, and the fact that the power system in the series, mainly the power levels, are nonsensical. These seem to be observations that the fanbase has taken as fact. But here's the thing, neither of those statements are true. Goku isn't the greatest father in the world, but he's still a very caring one, who's willing to do anything for his children, including dying, which he has done. And power levels are not nonsense, they're the most straightforward and simple concept in the entire series, that have stayed consistent the entire time. But for some bizarre reason, many people who have seen the show believe those statements to be true. And for the longest time, I have always asked myself why that is the case. And then I remembered Dragon Ball Z Abridged. If you haven't seen Dragon Ball Z Abridged, you should, it's amazing. It is fundamentally a satirical retelling of Dragon Ball Z. And in the show, there was this running gag that power levels were nonsense, and that Goku was a bad father. Now, I'm not saying that it's Dragon Ball Z Abridged's fault, however, there is a clear connection here. At its peak, Dragon Ball Z Abridged became synonymous with the fanbase. Moreover, it became very common for clips of both shows to become interchanged, and some people were unable to tell the difference. This is a brief example, however, it does demonstrate how satire can be used to change the collective understanding of a topic. In this example, the ramifications of satire were minimal. All it did was cause some aggravating arguments on Twitter. But what if this example was taken to a larger and more drastic level? I guess what I'm asking is, can satire affect politics on a national level? And if so, how? Perhaps our way to answer this question is with South Park and Al Gore. Part 1. Climate Change in the Early 2000s. During the early 2000s, there was an American presidential election between some guy and candidate Al Gore. Al Gore was a former vice president of the United States of America, and was a candidate like many others. However, what made him different was his opinion on climate change. Back then, one reason people didn't believe in climate change was the lack of knowledge on the subject. However, Al Gore was intentionally pushing the effects of climate change into public consciousness. And if he had been elected, he could have actually taken serious steps towards changing things. However, there were several factors that led to his loss. One of the main reasons was a lack of belief in the issue, even with the evidence. By today's standards, it is pretty hard to imagine a world that doesn't believe in climate change, or rather, that doesn't know the evidence and simply ignores or denies it. Of course that still happens, however it is heavily reduced compared to the early 2000s. And if you want to get a better reflection of what that mental state was like, I think we should take a closer look at South Park. No, seriously. Part 2. South Park and ManBearPig. South Park is an American adult cartoon created by Trey Parker and Matt Stone, and it is, to put it simply, known to make fun of everything and everyone, even when it costs them friends or even almost their lives. But no matter what, they've always stuck to their guns and almost never apologize, which is something I can kind of respect. However, there have been some specific times in which both creators have apologized for episodes they made. One of the episodes they apologized for was a portrayal of Al Gore in an episode called ManBearPig. In the episode, Al Gore, who is presented as an idiot, convinces the main four boys to help him hunt down the ManBearPig, a mythical creature who is terrorizing other civilians. But after a while, it becomes apparent that ManBearPig is not actually real and simply a figment of Al Gore's imagination. In the end, the kids come to the realization that he's simply crazy. Obviously, ManBearPig is a metaphor for climate change, and with this episode, both creators of South Park made their stance on the subject very clear. They felt climate change was essentially a myth, and thought that Al Gore was essentially crazy. Part 3. Climate Change Denial. This episode is an interesting puzzle piece in the overall public opinion of Al Gore. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that Al Gore was this perfect angelic being. At the end of the day, he was an American politician. However, what I am saying is, ManBearPig and other pieces like it helped to warp his image in a negative light, regardless of how true it was. Which begs the question, how? How can a satirical piece actually help to destroy or warp the public opinion of someone? Well, I think the reason is pretty simple. Reinforcement. South Park didn't change the mind of anyone on the topic of climate change. People back then had their own opinions already, and for the most part that would not change. Something I find quite fascinating is what Al Gore named his documentary on climate change. An inconvenient truth. That term is very eye-catching to me, because in our current year, the last thing I would call the climate crisis is an inconvenience. But back then it really was. Back in the early 2000s, the effects of climate change were very minimal, and people could not really see them for at least a few years in the future. So to them, it was actually a very inconvenient truth about the world. One which everyone could simply ignore was happening. And the average person really didn't want to think about this. They didn't want to think about how their actions may be inadvertently killing the planet. And when you don't want to think about something terrible, you justify any reason not to. So when the episode aired, the non-believers were reinforced in their beliefs. The episode told them that their concerns were nonsensical and Al Gore truly was some crazy person, and you really don't have to worry about it that much. It's similar to what we see with Dragon Ball. The people who believe Goku is a bad father are usually the ones who never liked his character to begin with. And of course, those who say power levels are meaningless are usually the ones who never liked the concept to begin with. All Dragon Ball Z Abridged did was reinforce those ideas through an inside joke. But eventually it became so reinforced that some believed it to be true. To wrap things up, several years later, when the effects of climate change became apparent, a new episode of South Park aired, where the ManBearPig turned out to be real. The kids now must look for Al Gore for help. But of course, Al Gore is reluctant in helping them due to how he was treated last time. And oddly enough, the kids give him one. Like I've said before, an apology from South Park is a rarity. But here they felt the need to give one, and moving forward, they treat the ManBearPig as an actual serious threat. And to me at least, this just shows how much their opinion on the subject has changed, and how much they're willing to do to repair old mistakes. And that is by making sure that no one watching their show would ever fall for climate denial. Because at the end of the day, there is a power to satire. It can warp the truth by acting as a bridge between two different ideals, regardless of how ridiculous the other end of the ideal may be. Not by tricking you into coming to those conclusions, but by helping you grow the beliefs you already have on something. And at its weakest, it can result in thinking a fictional man is a bad father, and at its worst, it can result in a belief so careless that if left unchecked, it can result in apathy in the face of Armageddon. Thanks for watching.